The words hang in the air, thick and suffocating, like a wool blanket soaked in poison. "It's a family decision, sweetheart." My mother's voice, usually a gentle coo when she wants something, is laced with a firmness that feels like a slap. My father nods, his face a mask of solemn agreement, but his eyes dart away, unable to meet mine. And David, my brother, David, sits there, a little too still, a little too carefully neutral, the ghost of a smirk playing around his lips. He's always been better at hiding his tells than I am. Mine are probably flashing like a neon sign right now. Disbelief, a sickening lurch in my stomach, the burn of unshed tears, the inheritance, Grandpa's inheritance, gone, just like that. Given to David, because it's better for the family, my family, or, apparently, theirs. If you've ever felt that cold dread crawl up your spine, that moment where the world tilts and nothing makes sense, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me share these stories more than you know. Normal life. What even is that? For me, it was a quiet rhythm punctuated by the comforting predictability of Grandpa Joe. He was my anchor, my port in the perpetual low-grade storm that was my immediate family. My parents, they meant well, I suppose, in their own way. A way that usually involved focusing all their hopes, dreams, and financial projections onto David. He was the golden boy, the one destined for greatness, the one who could do no wrong. I was just me, the quiet one, the observer, the one who learned early on to make herself small, to not need too much, to not expect too much. Grandpa Joe was different. He saw me, really saw me. His house, a rambling old Victorian filled with the scent of pipe tobacco, lemon polish, and ancient books, was my sanctuary. He never talked down to me, even when I was a kid. He'd discuss politics, philosophy, the migratory patterns of birds, all with the same serious consideration. He taught me how to play chess, how to identify constellations, how to make the perfect cup of tea, strong, with a splash of milk, no sugar. "Sugar dulls the palate, kiddo," he'd say, winking. "And life's too full of flavor to dull any of it." He knew about the dynamic with my parents and David. He never overtly criticized them in front of me, but there was a certain sadness in his eyes when he'd watch our family interactions, a gentle squeeze of my shoulder afterwards that said, "I know. I see." He'd often tell me stories about his own life, about building his business from scratch, about successes and failures, about shrewd decisions and moments of pure luck. He emphasized independence, resilience. "Never let anyone else define your worth, Annie," he'd say, his gaze steady and kind. "You've got a good head on your shoulders and a strong heart. That's more valuable than all the gold in Fort Knox." I never thought much about inheritance. Grandpa Joe seemed immortal, a fixture in my life as constant as the North Star. The idea of him not being there was a dark, shapeless fear I pushed to the furthest corners of my mind. Money, assets, those were adult concerns, things my parents and David discussed in hushed, serious tones. I was content with the richness of Grandpa's stories, his time, his unwavering belief in me. That felt like inheritance enough. David, on the other hand, always seemed to have an eye on the future, specifically Grandpa's future assets. He'd make comments, casual but pointed, about the value of the house, about Grandpa's investment portfolio. "Grandpa's done well for himself," he'd say with an appreciative nod, as if already appraising the estate. My parents would murmur agreement. It made my skin crawl. It felt ghoulish, like vultures circling. I'd usually make an excuse and leave the room. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Gray, drizzly, the kind of day that mirrors a heavy heart. It was my mother, her voice strained, cracking. "Annie, it's Grandpa. He's gone." Just like that, the North Star extinguished, the world tilted, then shattered. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, hushed condolences, and the suffocating scent of lilies. David was appropriately somber, my parents looked genuinely bereaved. For a while, the usual family tensions were muted by shared grief, or so I thought. A week later, the family summit was called. In the formal living room, the one reserved for important occasions and Christmas. The air was thick with unspoken things. My father cleared his throat, a sound that always preceded bad news or a lecture. "Annie, David," he began, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "We need to discuss your grandfather's estate." My mother twisted her wedding ring, her knuckles white. David sat forward slightly, a flicker of something, anticipation, in his eyes. Then came the pronouncement. That Grandpa Joe's will, as they understood it, or perhaps as they decided it, would leave his assets to be managed for the good of the family. And that, after careful consideration, they, as the parental arbiters of all things sensible and just, had decided the best course of action was for David to receive the bulk of it. "David's starting his new business venture, you see," my mother explained, her voice regaining some of its usual persuasive sweetness. "It requires significant capital, and this way the money stays in the family, working for the family." She smiled, a strained, hopeful expression. "It's a family decision, sweetheart, to benefit everyone in the long run." My stomach dropped. I stared at them, trying to reconcile the image of my loving, fair-minded grandfather with this blatant favoritism, this casual dismissal of me. Grandpa wanted this?" I managed to choke out, the words tasting like ash. "Well, not in so many words, perhaps," my father conceded, finally looking at me, a touch of impatience in his eyes. "His will is a little vague on specifics for distribution between you two. It leaves a lot to interpretation, to our discretion as parents, and we feel this is the most responsible way to honor his legacy, to ensure it grows, to secure the family's future." David nodded solemnly. "I'll make sure it's a good investment, Annie, for all of us." The smirk was back, faint but undeniable. He looked like the cat that didn't just get the cream, but the entire dairy farm. The shock was a physical blow. I felt hollowed out, betrayed not just by them, but by the memory of Grandpa Joe they were now twisting to suit their narrative. Vague? Grandpa Joe? The man who planned his grocery list with military precision? It didn't ring true, not for a second. But what could I do? Argue? Scream? They had made their family decision. I was just the dissenting vote, easily overruled. The silence in the room pressed down on me, heavy with their certainty and my burgeoning despair. I wanted to run back to Grandpa's house, to the safety of his presence, but he wasn't there anymore. I was alone with this cold, hard reality. My first attempts to reason with them were met with a wall of well-intentioned condescension. "Annie, dear, you don't understand these things," my mother would say, patting my hand as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "It's complex, financial strategy. David has the acumen for this." David, who once invested his student loan money in a guaranteed win crypto scheme and lost half of it. Acumen. Right. My father was more direct. "It's done, Annie. Arguing won't change anything. We're doing what's best." His tone brooked no further discussion. It was the same tone he used when I questioned why David got a new car for his 16th birthday and I got a bus pass. "David needs it more." That was always the refrain. I tried talking to David alone. Maybe, just maybe, he'd have a shred of conscience. I found him in his room, already sketching out plans for his new office space, a glossy brochure for high-end ergonomic chairs open on his desk. "David, this isn't right," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You know Grandpa would have wanted to be fair." He leaned back, steepling his fingers, the picture of a young business mogul. "Fair, Annie, this is fair. The money gets put to good use, generates more money. You'll benefit eventually when the business takes off. It's a win-win." He smiled, that infuriatingly smug smile. "Besides, what would you even do with it? Buy a bunch of books? Donate it to a cat shelter?" The dismissal stung, sharp and deep. It wasn't just about the money, was it? It was about respect, about being seen as an equal, a capable adult. In their eyes, I was still the dreamy, impractical girl, incapable of handling anything more significant than pocket money. The anger started to burn then, a slow, steady fire in my gut. It wasn't just grief and hurt anymore. It was a cold, hard rage. Days turned into a week, then 2. The family atmosphere was thick with a cloying sort of pity directed at me, and a triumphant, barely concealed excitement emanating from David and, by extension, my parents. David started talking about scouting locations for his venture, a vague app development company he'd been dreaming about. He dropped names of expensive software, high-end developers he planned to hire. He was spending the money before it had even cleared probate, spending my grandfather's legacy, spending what felt like a part of me. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Any mention of Grandpa, any hint of the future, was colored by this injustice. I retreated further into myself, the silence in Grandpa's now empty house, my only solace. I'd wander through the rooms, touching his books, sitting in his favorite armchair, trying to feel his presence, to find some guidance in the emptiness he'd left behind. The house itself felt like it was holding its breath, mourning not just its owner but the fairness he embodied. I started avoiding my family. Meals were eaten in my room. Phone calls went unanswered. The more they tried to normalize the situation, to act as if their family decision was a settled, immutable fact, the more alienated I felt. They were poisoning the well of my memories, tainting everything Grandpa Joe stood for. His emphasis on independence, on fairness, on my inherent worth, it all felt like a cruel joke in the face of their actions. One afternoon, I was sorting through a box of Grandpa's old papers, a task I'd been putting off, each item a fresh stab of grief, old photographs, letters, receipts from decades past. And then, tucked into a faded leather-bound journal, I found an envelope. It was thicker than the others, made of heavy cream-colored paper, addressed to me in Grandpa's familiar, spidery handwriting. My name. Just my name. No stamp, no postmark. It had been meant for me to find, here, in this quiet space of his. My fingers trembled as I slid it open. Inside, there wasn't a letter, not in the traditional sense. There was a single sheet of paper, a formal document with the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize, and a small folded note, also in Grandpa's hand. I read the note first. "My dearest Annie," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm off on my next great adventure. Don't you grieve too long, kiddo. Life's for the living. I've always worried about you, about your innate kindness being taken for weakness by those who should know better. You are stronger than you think, and far more capable than some might give you credit for. I've taken some steps, a long time ago, to ensure you have the independence we always talked about. The enclosed is a starting point. Use it wisely. Build your own life, on your own terms. Don't let anyone dim your light. I love you, Grandpa Joe." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the words. It was like hearing his voice again, feeling his steadying hand on my shoulder. Then I unfolded the formal document. It was a summary statement from something called the Polaris Trust. Assets listed, a diversified portfolio, properties, including Grandpa's house. And the sole beneficiary, upon his passing, Annie R. Walker, me. My head spun. A trust? A private trust, set up just for me? The numbers on the page swam before my eyes. It was substantial, more than substantial. It was everything. Everything they thought they were giving to David. Grandpa Joe, the man they dismissed as vague, had outmaneuvered them all, years in advance. He hadn't been vague, he'd been discreet. He'd been strategic, he'd protected me, even from beyond the grave. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Overwhelming gratitude, a fresh wave of grief for this incredible man, and a burgeoning, almost giddy sense of power. The world, which had been gray and oppressive, suddenly seemed full of sharp, bright colors. The weight on my chest lifted. My parents' family decision was built on a foundation of sand, on an assumption that was entirely, devastatingly wrong. They didn't know. They had no idea. For a few days I held this knowledge close, a secret treasure. It was my armor, my hidden weapon. I watched my family, their dynamics unchanged. David was now talking about leasing a prime downtown office. He'd even bought a new, ridiculously expensive watch, a businessman's essential, he declared, flashing it at dinner. My mother beamed, my father nodded approvingly. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their sound financial planning, on securing David's glorious future. The temptation to just let them crash and burn was strong. To let David sign leases, hire staff, only to have the rug pulled out from under him when the estate lawyer, Grandpa's actual estate lawyer, not just the one my parents consulted for their interpretation, finally contacted them. But Grandpa Joe's note echoed in my mind. Use it wisely. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about claiming what was mine, honoring his wishes, and perhaps teaching a long overdue lesson. The deepening crisis wasn't just external anymore. It was internal. Part of me, the part that still craved their approval, that still remembered moments of familial warmth, however fleeting, felt a pang of guilt. This revelation would shatter them. It would expose their biases, their misjudgment, their casual cruelty in the harshest light. Could I do that to my own parents, my own brother? Then I'd remember David's smirk, my mother's condescending pats, my father's dismissive tone. I'd remember Grandpa's kind eyes, his unwavering belief in me. He hadn't set this up to cause a war, but to ensure my security, my independence. He trusted me to handle it. The conflict churned within me. I'd look at the trust documents, hidden beneath my mattress like a talisman, and feel a surge of strength. Then I'd hear David on the phone, excitedly discussing his seed capital with a potential investor, and the anger would return, cold and sharp. He was building a castle in the sky with bricks that didn't belong to him. My parents were cheering him on, oblivious. The irony was almost too much. They were so confident, so dismissive of me, so certain of their control. The family decision was their gospel. They were all in, betting the farm, or rather, Grandpa's farm, on David. The calls from Mr. Alistair Finch, the lawyer whose name was on the trust document, started coming. He was patient, kind, very much like Grandpa in his calm demeanor. He explained everything. The trust was irrevocable, established years ago. Grandpa Joe had been meticulous. Mr. Finch had been waiting for me to contact him, as per Grandpa's instructions. He'd given me time to grieve, and then time to discover the documents at my own pace. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, Miss Walker, he said. He had immense faith in you. Those words solidified something within me. Immense faith. Grandpa hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a vote of confidence, a shield, and a sword. The internal debate quieted. The guilt receded, replaced by a steely resolve. This wasn't about destroying them, it was about honoring him and about finally, definitively, claiming my own worth, not as defined by them, but by myself and by the one man who had always seen it clearly. I decided the confrontation needed to happen, not in anger, not in triumph, but with quiet, unshakable certainty. I asked Mr. Finch if he would be present. He agreed it would be prudent. The turning point wasn't a dramatic outburst, but a calm phone call to my mother. I think we need to have another family meeting, I said, my voice even. About Grandpa's estate, and I'd like Mr. Finch, Grandpa's lawyer, to be there. A slight pause on her end. Mr. Finch? But we've already sorted things out, dear. Dad spoke to Henderson from his firm. No, Mom, I said, a new firmness in my voice that surprised even me. Mr. Alistair Finch. He was Grandpa's personal solicitor for many years. There are details you're not aware of. The subtle shift in my tone must have registered. There was a nervous edge to her voice when she agreed. All right, Annie, if you think it's necessary. The day of the meeting, the air in the formal living room was even heavier than before. My parents sat together on the sofa, a united front, though my mother kept fidgeting with a loose thread on the upholstery. David lounged in an armchair, feigning nonchalance, but he kept glancing at the door. I sat opposite them, Mr. Blank. Finch beside me. A calm, reassuring presence in his impeccably tailored suit, a leather briefcase resting by his feet. My father started, his voice attempting a jovial, in-control tone. Well, Annie, Mr. Finch, not sure what this is all about. As we've discussed, the family has come to an arrangement regarding Joe's assets, all very amicable. Mr. Finch smiled politely, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Mr. Walker, Mrs. Walker, David, I understand you've had some discussions. However, Joseph, your father, made some very specific, legally binding arrangements quite some time ago concerning the entirety of his estate. My mother frowned. Specific? But his will was rather open, wasn't it, Arthur? She said, looking at my father. He nodded. Left a lot to our discretion, as his children, to manage in the family's best interest. Mr. Finch's expression remained neutral. He opened his briefcase and retrieved a sheaf of documents. Joseph's last will and testament is indeed quite straightforward. It bequeaths his personal effects as per a separate memorandum. However, the vast majority of his assets, his properties, investments, and liquid funds were not part of his probate estate. A confused silence descended. David stopped trying to look bored and sat up straighter. My father's brow furrowed. Not part? What are you talking about? Where are they then? They were placed over a period of several years into a private, irrevocable trust, Mr. Finch stated calmly. He slid a summary document across the coffee table. The Polaris Trust. Established by Joseph Walker. The sole trustee until his passing was Joseph Walker himself. Upon his demise, I, Alistair Finch, am named as the succeeding trustee to manage the assets according to the trust deed. My father picked up the paper, his eyes scanning it. My mother leaned in, reading over his shoulder. David got up and moved to look as well. I watched their faces. Confusion, disbelief. A dawning, sickening realization. And the beneficiary of this, Polaris Trust? My father asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. Mr. Finch looked directly at me, then back at them. The sole irrevocable beneficiary of the Polaris Trust, upon Joseph Walker's passing, is his granddaughter, Miss Annie Rosalind Walker. He paused, letting the words sink in. Effectively, Annie inherits the entirety of what constituted your father's significant wealth. The house we are currently in, his investment portfolios, everything. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears, a vacuum where all their assumptions, all their plans, had just imploded. My mother's face went white. She looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper, as if unable to comprehend the words. My father's jaw was tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. David was the first to break. What? No, that's not possible. His voice was a squeak. The smugness had vanished, replaced by a look of utter, bewildered panic. Grandpa wouldn't. The business. My seed capital. Mr. Finch addressed him coolly. I'm afraid your grandfather made his intentions very clear, young man. The trust documents are ironclad. They were established many years ago and regularly updated. His primary concern was Annie's future security and independence. My mother finally found her voice, a thin, reedy whisper. Annie. But why? We decided. You decided based on incomplete information, Mrs. Walker, Mr. Finch said. Not unkindly, but firmly. Joseph was a private man. He clearly wished for these arrangements to remain confidential until the appropriate time. My father looked at me, truly looked at me, for what felt like the first time in years. There was no anger yet, just a profound, shell-shocked confusion. You knew about this, Annie? I met his gaze, my own calm. I found out recently. Grandpa left me a letter. A letter? David yelped. And you didn't say anything? You let me? You let us? He gestured wildly, speechless. He looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, and for a moment, I thought he might be sick. All his grand plans, his leased offices, his talk of hiring, all built on air. You made a family decision, remember? I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the stillness. You told me it was for the good of the family. You told me I wouldn't know what to do with it. You were quite clear on your assessment of my capabilities. A small, dry smile touched my lips. It wasn't triumphant, more weary. It seems Grandpa had a different assessment. My mother started to cry then, soft, hiccuping sobs. But we're her parents. We were trying to help David, to help the family. By disinheriting me? I asked, the question hanging in the air. By assuming I was incapable or less deserving. The fight seemed to drain out of them. My father slumped back against the sofa, looking suddenly old, defeated. David just stared, his face pale, his dreams turning to dust before his eyes. The family decision had been based on their power, their control, their perception of Grandpa's assets as something they had a right to allocate. And in one fell swoop, Grandpa Joe, with his quiet foresight and deep love for me, had removed all of that from their grasp. He hadn't just left me his wealth, he'd left me the ultimate vindication. He'd ensured his legacy wouldn't be twisted by their biases. He'd given me the power to define my own future, exactly as he'd always encouraged me to do. The silence in the room was no longer oppressive, it was clear, sharp, and utterly transformative. They had been completely blindsided. And in their shock, I saw not just the collapse of their plans, but the undeniable truth of Grandpa's wisdom. In the aftermath, the silence lingered, but it was a different kind. It was the silence of broken assumptions, of shattered illusions. My mother continued to weep quietly, not with the dramatic flair she sometimes employed, but with a genuine, lost despair. My father just sat there, staring into space, the documents from Mr. Finch lying forgotten on the coffee table. David had sunk back into his chair, looking small and deflated, all the bluster gone. The expensive watch on his wrist seemed to mock him. Mr. Finch, ever the professional, quietly gathered his papers. "I will be in touch, Annie, to discuss the administration of the trust. There are formalities, of course, but your grandfather made everything exceptionally clear. He gave me a small, encouraging nod. He would be very proud of you." Those words were a balm. Proud. It was all I'd ever wanted from any of them, and the one person who truly meant it wasn't here to see it. When Mr. Finch left, the dam of their restraint finally broke, but not in the way I expected. There were no accusations, no renewed arguments, just an awful, empty quiet. Eventually, my mother looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Annie, we never meant to hurt you." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Didn't you?" I asked, not unkindly, but the question needed to be voiced. "Or did you just assume I wouldn't mind, or wouldn't fight back?" She had no answer. My father finally spoke, his voice gravelly. "Your grandfather, he always did have a mind of his own." There was a grudging respect in his tone, but also a deep, uncomprehending hurt. He couldn't understand why his own father would go to such lengths, bypassing him entirely. David just looked at me. "So, all that talk about my business, it's gone?" "The money you were counting on was never yours to begin with, David," I said as gently as I could. "It was always meant for me." There was no satisfaction in their defeat, only a profound sadness. These were my parents, my brother. We shared blood, history. But somewhere along the way, the lines of love and obligation had become twisted, distorted by favoritism and assumption. Grandpa Joe hadn't just secured my future, he'd exposed the fault lines in our family, clear and undeniable. In the weeks that followed, things were strained. My parents avoided me, moving around the house like ghosts. David was sullen and resentful, though he did return the expensive watch. The store, luckily, had a generous return policy. He had to face the reality of finding actual investors, of building something on his own merit, not on an unearned windfall. I moved into Grandpa's house. It felt right. It was a sanctuary, filled with his presence, his love. I started going through his things more thoroughly, not with grief, but with a sense of connection, of understanding him better. His books, his notes, his meticulously organized files, they all spoke of a man who was deliberate, thoughtful, and incredibly loving. The money, the sheer scale of it, was daunting at first. But Mr. Finch was a patient guide, and Grandpa's instructions within the trust were clear. To live well, to be secure, but also to be generous and wise. I started a small foundation in Grandpa's name, focusing on things he cared about, literacy programs, and support for young people trying to find their footing, just as he had supported me. My relationship with my parents and David is a work in progress. It's not broken, not entirely, but it's forever changed. The old dynamics were shattered, and we're slowly, awkwardly, trying to find a new way to be a family, one based on more honest footing. There's a distance now, a wariness. Perhaps, in time, it will heal. Perhaps not, but I'm no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter. I am Annie Walker, beneficiary of the Polaris Trust, yes, but more importantly, the granddaughter who was seen, loved, and trusted by an extraordinary man. Grandpa Joe gave me more than an inheritance. He gave me back to myself. He showed me that my worth wasn't dependent on their approval, that my path was my own to forge. And that, I realize, is the greatest legacy of all. It's a bittersweet victory, tinged with the sadness of what was lost with my family, but also illuminated by the bright, steady light of his enduring faith in me, a faith I now carry forward. If this story hit close to home, or if you've ever had to find your own strength in the face of family expectations, I'd love to hear your version. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.